Hey everyone, good afternoon. My name is Ruth Horry, and I'm really excited to begin one of our first session recaps. So, today's session, or this week's session, week one, would be accessing culturally appropriate therapy. And so, this is a really important topic. So, I think it's really important that we have these recaps to make sure that you got the information and that nothing was missed so that as we move and progress through weeks, we're building on top of a good foundation. So I'm going to jump right on in. The title of this training is Pour the Tea, and this is a teen and young adult edition. And so the purpose of this training is to provide a step by step guide to help those who are navigating the system while healing from or dealing with trauma. And so when we talk about culturally appropriate therapy, today we're going to go over what that is and why it's so important. And so let's jump right in with how does culture affect your mental health? And so when we talk about culturally appropriate therapy, we talk about meeting with a provider that is understanding or has an understanding of your background and your culture because that influences how we understand health, illness, and well being in general. So, culture shapes our worldviews, our beliefs, and our behaviors, and what we see as normal. And it's through this lens which we're able to make sense of our experiences. And so some of the symptoms of that expression would be how we express distress or mental health system symptoms. So, for instance, while one person from one culture might describe themselves as being sad or depressed or feeling hopeless, another culture may not describe it at all. It may come out as fatigue, feeling tired, or body aches, and things of that nature. So it's really important to understand cultures and backgrounds. When you're choosing a therapist, you want to make sure that they're aware of those things, that those things are important to them. Because believe it or not, or like it or not, a lot of these systems that are set up to help the general public, when they were put together, it didn't include everyone in the general public. So black and brown people were often excluded from these studies. And so what they have is based off of their culture. So just keeping that in mind. Um, Therapy is for everyone, but if it's not given in the right way, um, it's useless. And so, one analogy I like to make for young people, since makeup is really popular, if we all have the task of we all need foundation, we all need a base, right? And everyone receives a bottle, and I get a foundation that's 5 shades lighter than my skin tone. I have what I need, but not in the way that I need it, if that makes sense. So if you're going to a therapist and you're feeling like they can't relate to you or you're not relating to this process, it doesn't mean that therapy is not for you. It may mean that the therapist that you're seeing is not the right therapist for you. So I never want you to like discount therapy. And so another area which culture affects mental health is the stigma and mental health. So many cultures attach a really big stigma to mental health issues, um, which can lead to people being less likely to seek help or even acknowledge that there is a problem. One of the things that I grew up hearing was mind over matter. And if you think it is, it will be. And to be honest, we don't look at any other part of our life like that. And so if you break your arm, you don't say, well, if I think it's broken, it will be broken. You run to the doctor and you take the necessary steps to heal and to fix the problem. And so your mental health, it should be seen in the same way. And so cultural norms and coping mechanisms. So different cultures have distinct coping strategies and ways that they deal with stress and trauma. So another example is some cultures may prioritize a social harmony while others prefer confrontation. So some cultures are not as confrontational and they may feel a certain way, but because of the way that their culture is set up, they're not encouraged to have maybe outbursts of emotion. And then there are some cultures which prefer it's on their sleeve. And so just recognizing and appreciating those can be essential to any therapeutic process. So when we think about why is culturally sensitive therapy important, um, or the sensitivity to it, there are a set of skills around acknowledging and appreciating cultural differences and similarities. So if you ignore those things and if you act like those things don't exist, then it's hard to diagnose a person. It's hard to give them an effective treatment plan. So, for an example, um, it is was thought in the medical field a long time ago, and I think still to some providers to this day, that Black and Brown people don't feel pain like their white counterparts. And so we know that that's not true. But if you're led to believe that when I'm complaining of being in pain, or a lot of symptoms of anxiety were physical. For me, it was my whole body trembling, breaking down. I was breathing fast, feeling like I was going to pass out. Um, and then when I went to therapy and was starting like the breathing and actually like mastering the breathing and working through it with the techniques they were giving me, then other parts of my body were shutting down. So I wouldn't be able to see, or I wouldn't have feeling from my knees down. And so it's just to say that there, if you're not recognizing that my pain is real, then I'm not getting diagnosed properly. You can't give me an effective treatment plan. And that leads to poor outcomes. You don't like the therapist, you think therapy is ineffective, and you end up not getting the healing that you deserve, that you deserve. There's no other better way to say that. So why it's important is another reason why it's important is to avoid the misinterpretation. So when you consider other cultures, we prevent these misunderstandings from happening. So what might be a symptom from one culture might be a norm for another. For instance, hearing voices might be seen as schizophrenia for some cultures, but it's could be seen as spiritual and religious in others. And so that's another example of why, if a person isn't aware of your culture, your customs, and what is the norm in your world, then it's hard for them to not misinterpret some of the things that we may do in our culture. And so I'll give another basic example. Not to say that I agree or disagree, but when you would say things like, "Oh, you get popped," or you get hit with the slipper, that may be a norm in Hispanic culture. And so if you're not familiar with that, you hear it and you're like, "Oh my gosh," and but if there was someone who was more culturally sensitive, even if they felt that that wasn't a good thing, it wouldn't be a shock and a whole lesson for them to learn. They could get right into whatever it is that they need to say about that. And so that's why it's really important. And last but not least, it improves mental health outcomes. So if you give the right treatment for the problem, you're more than likely to have better outcomes. So a one size fits all approach can actually hinder the therapeutic process. And so I say all this to say it's not you, it's them. And taking the time to find a therapist that works for you and that is culturally appropriate and sensitive, it's worth the effort. And that is definitely something that if you are looking for assistance with, You can speak to your caseworker, case manager. You can speak with me. I can help you find local places that offer those therapeutic services, but also give you the option to select a provider that is culturally competent. And so when we tailor mental health interventions to suit an individual's cultural context, that can lead to better engagement and better outcomes. And so I implore you to take a look at the rest of the chapter. It's a really short chapter. And we really go over why it's important, a little bit more of my story and why I feel it helped me in my life, and how things changed for me when I got the right therapist. Like when I turned on that Zoom and I saw someone who had hair that looked like mine, and I could get right to what I needed to get to without having to convince them or take them into my world when I had a problem I needed to solve. And that shouldn't be my work. So I hope this broke down a little bit more of what culturally appropriate therapy is, why you deserve it, and ways that you can access it if you are looking for culturally appropriate therapy. So I implore you to give it a try. If it doesn't work, you can come back and say, that didn't work for me. How can we find another way? But I don't want you to discredit it if you've A, never been, or B, you've been, but you haven't had the best experience. And if you'd like to share your experience, I'd love to hear. If you would love to share what you love about therapy, what not so much, I'd love to hear your thoughts and how you processed this information. And so, in conclusion, at the end of every chapter, I encourage you all to journal your process. And so, how did this new information about culturally appropriate therapy land with you? And be honest. It's okay to express how it really makes you feel. And so you can take time to just jot down a few thoughts, whatever that may be. I'm going to give it a try. This was interesting. Not for me. Whatever it is that you felt about it, I hope that you learned something that you didn't know and that you'll consider putting yourself first and getting not only the physical care that you need, but the mental care as well. And that is it for me. Thank you for joining, and you are loved.